friends, welcome to another episode of Genius and Ink podcast. I have to be honest, it's been a while since I uploaded an episode. I was quite overwhelmed with the newborn child and she needs a lot of care, so I decided to take a quite long break. But I'm back, and I'm back with a new passage from one of the greatest thinkers of all time. This thinker will tell us how we can organize our library, our thoughts, and remember what we read, and how organize our thinking and knowledge. Before we'll continue and I'll tell you more about this thinker, I would like to remind you what this podcast is about. It is based on a very old ancient Japanese idea called Guan. In Zen Buddhist practice, Guan is a thought, discussion, or a question that provokes you into thinking. And over the past 15 years, I've collected many Guans like this. Because I document every book that I read. I write down, I copy down all the quotes to my commonplace notebooks. And right now, as I'm recording this in my library. I have around 30 different moleskin notebooks filled with those kind of Guans, with ideas from great authors that provoked me into thinking, that changed my worldview. For many years, those Guans, those ideas were staying silently on the shelves of my library. And I thought, how can I use them? How can I remember them? And I thought I'll share them with you in this podcast. So what you're listening to right now is my essentially commonplace book that has gone to public, that has become a podcast. The philosopher that we are going to discuss in this episode, his name is Arthur Schopenhauer. He's a famous thinker and he influenced other philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that Schopenhauer has flipped his worldview upside down. This happened after Nietzsche has read Schopenhauer's greatest magnum opus of Schopenhauer, which is called The World as Will and Representation. Today, we are going to talk about another work by Schopenhauer. It is called On Thinking for Yourself. And interestingly enough, we are going to discuss just a very short passage. But since Schopenhauer is such a deep thinker, you can discuss each word by him, each sentence written by him for hours. I'm going to try to keep it as short, as sweet, as simple as we can. I know that you don't have a lot of time, you have lots of things to do in your life, so I'm very grateful that you've stopped and decided to spend the next 10 minutes with me. Let's first read this very short passage. I would like to say that everything that I mention here, you will be able to find in the description of this episode. So if you would like to go and buy the edition of Schopenhauer's essays that I use, you can find it down below in whichever app you're listening this to. Right, let's begin with this passage on Thinking for Yourself by Arthur Schopenhauer. As the biggest library, if it is in disorder, is not as useful as a small but a well-arranged one, so you may accumulate a vast amount of knowledge, but it will be of far less value to you than a much smaller amount if you have not thought it over for yourself. Because only through ordering what you know, by comparing every truth with every other truth, can you take complete possession of your knowledge and get it in your power. You can think about only what you know, so you ought to learn something. On the other hand, you can know only what you have thought about. This is a very brief passage, and as I wanted to say, it's of course very hard to fully comprehend and absorb every idea just upon reading and listening it out loud. So let's discuss some of the key ideas here. What fascinates me about Schopenhauer is his visual image here, because he says that as the biggest library, if it is in disorder, is not useful as a small but a well-arranged one, it kind of fascinates me how perfectly he describes certain states of mind. Because imagine the National Library of your country. If you are in the United States, Library of Congress. If you are in Britain, British Library. And now imagine if all those books that are there are in complete chaos and disorder, that you cannot find just even basic books that you would like to. Imagine how useless is this library, because essentially what makes Library of Congress great is not so much the books that it contains, but how well they are organized and how well they are preserved. But what is really amazing here, it's almost breathtaking, is to imagine that our minds often is disorganized. Often, even if you are intelligent, well-read, you have good taste in films, whatever it is, it can be completely useless if your thoughts and your knowledge is unstructured. If your knowledge is like a chaotic library. And what is fascinating is the next sentence, where he says that essentially that a small amount of knowledge, well organized, is better than a large disorganized knowledge. Because an example from my life, I can give an example of one of my friends. He has read one book in his life, and that book is The Count of Monte Cristo. But he knows that book from the beginning till the end, all 1,300 pages in English translation. This friend of mine is a beautiful soul, a wonderful human being, but he has read just a single book. But I believe he's much more knowledgeable, to a degree even more intelligent, because he knows that book scene by scene. He can recite it to you almost chapter by chapter. It is fascinating how much he fell in love with that book. And I always thought about this, and I compared myself to this friend of mine. I read many books. I read much more than him, and it's not even a matter of modesty or immodesty, but truly I read thousands of times more than him. But do I know a single book as well as he knows The Count of Monte Cristo? I believe there is one book, but once again, does it mean that other 999 books, for example, that I read that he didn't, does it mean that they were useless? You know what I mean. I hope I'm not too rambling, but let's continue to the next passage. He says, because only through ordering what you know, by comparing every truth with every other truth, can you take complete possession of your knowledge and get it into your power. This is particularly relevant, in my opinion, when it comes to great philosophical books. As some of you know, I am fascinated by the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca. I've read his books 7 years ago, but I read them from the beginning till the end, without taking pauses to fully absorb what he says. Those of you who have read Seneca know that his advice is incredibly practical. I had to, instead of reading it from the beginning till the end and call it like putting a check mark that I've read this book, I had to read it chapter by chapter, slowly, to make that knowledge my own, to think about it, to make it my own possession. It's not the fact that you have read a book, it is the fact how much you've absorbed it what matters. And the last sentence that completely blew my mind, and I come back to it all the time. Schopenhauer says, you can think about only what you know, so you ought to learn something. On the other hand, you can know only what you have thought about. I need to divide those two sentences from each other, because essentially he says that in order to think, you need to learn. The reason why this passage blows my mind is because Schopenhauer essentially says that the quality of your thoughts will depend on the quality of ideas that you put in your mind. If your mind is filled with entertainment, therefore your thoughts are going to be very shallow. But if you put in your mind ideas from great films, the thoughts from great books, the quality of your thoughts are going to increase automatically to a degree. You don't have to be a wunderkind, a genius in order to have great thoughts. All you need is to think about what the great minds wrote about. I find this fascinating, but Schopenhauer continues. He says that on the other hand, you can know only what you have thought about. So not only you need to put something into your mind, just read a passage from Schopenhauer, but also you need to think about what you've read. I think this is an extremely important practice. We're coming back to how we should organize our libraries. As Schopenhauer said, that you need to organize your mind as if it's a library. Otherwise, it is of completely different use. But when it comes to a practical thing, such as how you should arrange books in your library, try arranging books in your library, not in alphabetical order, not in the order that you've read or the color of the spines, but the books that stand in connection to each other. The books that you see and connect dots between them. It is going to be a library of a very deep thinker if the books are arranged not in just simple mechanical alphabetical order or by the color of the spine, but books that stand with each other, that are related to in terms of ideas. This is how Schopenhauer organized his own library. I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast. I've recorded several episodes, so they are going to come out, I think, every 2 weeks, but it might be even quicker. It might be every single week. Once again, thank you for listening and thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.